1,500 people used to live here. Not one of them is allowed to go back. Not to visit. Not to see their own home. Not ever. This is the Chagos Islands, a tropical paradise. Officially, on paper, the people who lived here were never even considered permanent residents. Instead, the government gave them a different label, a legal fiction, written down in secret, designed so the law could never protect them. That trick worked for more than 50 years, thousands of miles from anywhere. In the early 1970s, one government decided it needed this place empty. So it loaded every family onto cargo ships. Then it erased an entire people from the map. 50 years later, the world's highest court ruled it was illegal. Britain ignored the ruling. Then came what looked like a breakthrough. The agreement collapsed. Right now, while you're watching this, the people forced from these islands are still waiting. Still banned. Still homeless. Still separated from the place they call home. Before any of this, the Chagos Islands were simply home. Not a military secret. Not a bargaining chip. Just home. The first people arrived in the late 1700s. They didn't come by choice. They were brought here as enslaved people by French plantation owners, forced to work coconut plantations on islands where no one had lived before. When slavery was abolished, their descendants stayed. They became free people on the only home they had ever known. Over the next 150 years, something remarkable happened. They built an entire society from almost nothing. Their own language, Chagossian Creole, spoken nowhere else on earth. Their own churches, their own music, their own traditions. They even had their own name, the Iloé, the Islanders. By the 20th century, life revolved around coconuts. Men harvested them, women dried the coconut meat into copra, children helped after school, then spent the rest of the day running along beaches that millions of people today would dream of visiting. It wasn't a perfect life. The work was hard, money was limited, everything depended on the plantation company. But it was home. They had work, schools, healthcare, a close community. People celebrated together, sang together, looked after one another. Years later, people who grew up on these islands would still describe it the same way. Beautiful, like paradise. But while families were building their lives here, thousands of miles away, officials in London and Washington were looking at these same islands very differently. Not as someone's home, as a problem that needed to disappear. In 1965, 3 years before Mauritius even became independent, Britain quietly cut a piece of it away. The Chagos Islands were separated from Mauritius and renamed something new, the British Indian Ocean Territory. No referendum, no vote. No one who actually lived there was ever asked. Because this was never really about Mauritius. It was about the Cold War, and one island the United States wanted very badly. Diego Garcia sat almost perfectly in the center of the Indian Ocean, close enough to reach the Middle East, East Africa, South Asia, and beyond. For military planners, there were few places on Earth more valuable. So Britain and the United States made a deal. Britain would provide the island for a joint military base. In return, the United States reduced Britain's bill for Polaris nuclear missiles by $14 million. An entire homeland, traded as part of a weapons discount. There was only one condition: the island had to be empty. No permanent population, no local government, no witnesses. There was just one problem. People already lived there. Nearly 1,500 people, families that had lived there for 6 generations. So British officials began solving the problem, not by moving the people, by changing the paperwork. One diplomat even wrote that alongside the birds, a few Tarzans, or Men Fridays, would need to go too. Not citizens, not families, just obstacles. That way of thinking became government policy, and in 1968, the paperwork became reality. It didn't begin with soldiers. It began with something far quieter. In 1967, anyone who left Chagos, even for medical treatment, was suddenly told they could never return. Families became separated overnight, not because they wanted to leave, because someone decided they could never come back. Then the supply ships changed. Less food, less medicine, less hope. No explanation. Starvation, hidden behind paperwork and shipping schedules. In 1971, a new law officially banned civilians from remaining on the islands. People whose families had lived there for generations were suddenly classified as immigrants on their own land. Then came the warning. Not aimed at the people, at their dogs. Every family had pets, animals their children had grown up with. British officials rounded them up, locked them inside an enclosure, and killed them in front of everyone. Children watched. The message was unmistakable. If this could happen to their dogs, it could happen to them. Some families were first moved to other islands inside the Chagos chain. They believed they were still home. They weren't. Within months, officials emptied those islands too. By April 1973, every inhabited island in the Chagos archipelago had been cleared. Families were packed into cargo holds, alongside livestock, fertilizer, and sacks of coconut. Many survivors later said it reminded them of the slave ships their ancestors had arrived on centuries earlier. History didn't repeat itself, it echoed. When the ships reached Mauritius and the Seychelles, there was nothing waiting. No homes, no jobs, no compensation. Thousands of people were left on the docks, carrying everything they owned. It would take 4 more years before a journalist finally exposed what had happened. By then, the military base was already being built. And the people who had once called Diego Garcia home had almost disappeared from history. Here's the part of this story most people never hear, because it didn't happen on a beach. It didn't happen on a dock. It happened in paperwork. By the 1960s, the era of empires quietly handing back the countries they controlled was well underway. The United Nations had rules for this. If Britain governed a territory with people already living on it, those people had rights, protections written directly into international law. So British officials found a way around having people at all. Not physically. On paper. In planning documents, Foreign Office officials worked out a new label for the 1,500 people living in Chagos. Not residents. Not an indigenous population. Transient contract workers. On paper, they weren't a society that had lived there for 6 generations. They were temporary labor, imported from Mauritius and the Seychelles. Their contracts had supposedly just ended. People who just happened to be leaving anyway. It wasn't true. Families could trace their roots on these islands to before the United States even existed. But if you convince the law that a population was never really there, you never have to answer for removing it. One official later summed up the whole strategy in a single sentence. They could simply make up the rules as they went along. And for a very long time, that worked. No United Nations committee reviewed the removal, because on paper, there was nothing to review. No British court heard the case, because for decades, no one believed there was even a legal case to bring. The paperwork finished what the ships had already started. It made 1,500 real people legally disappear. That trick held for almost 30 years. Then, in the late 1990s, one man who had been a child on the last ship out of Diego Garcia decided to challenge it. In court. His name was Olivier Bancoult. He was 4 years old when his family was forced onto a ship and taken to Mauritius. He grew up in the poverty the Chagossians had been abandoned to. As an adult, he became chairman of the Chagos refugees group. In the year 2000, he took the British government to court. He won. The High Court ruled that the 1971 order used to remove the Chagossians had gone beyond what the law allowed. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the paperwork had cracked. The government's own foreign secretary accepted the ruling. It finally looked like Chagossians would be allowed home, at least to the outer islands, if not Diego Garcia itself. For a moment, it looked like the story was over. It wasn't. In 2004, the government reached for a tool most people have never heard of, the royal prerogative. Orders issued in the monarch's name without Parliament ever voting. Using it, ministers quietly overturned their own court's ruling. The ban returned. No vote. No debate. Just one signature. Bancoult went back to court. In 2007, he won again. A different panel of judges ruled the government couldn't simply erase a legal decision it didn't like. Then, in 2008, he lost. The case reached the House of Lords, Britain's highest court at the time. The judges sided with the government, citing a government study claiming resettlement would cost too much. 3 decades of exile, measured against a spreadsheet. Outside the courtroom, Bancoult didn't sound defeated. He told reporters they would still return. One day, they would make Chagos home again. He spent the next decade proving he meant it. By the 2010s, the fight had grown beyond British courtrooms. Mauritius took the case to the highest legal authority on earth, the International Court of Justice in The Hague. The question was surprisingly simple. Had Britain really finished decolonizing Mauritius in 1968, if it had quietly kept part of the country for itself first? In 2019, the court answered, no, it hadn't. The judges ruled Britain's separation of the Chagos Islands in 1965 had been unlawful from the very beginning. Every decision built on top of it, the base, the ban, the exile, rested on a foundation the court said should never have existed. The United Nations General Assembly followed with an overwhelming vote, demanding Britain hand the islands back within 6 months. After 50 years, the law had finally caught up with history. For Olivier Bancoult, and for thousands of Chagossians, it finally felt like someone had listened. Then Britain ignored it. There was no army to enforce the ruling. No international police. No punishment. The world's highest court had spoken. Britain simply chose not to act. 6 months passed. Nothing changed. Diego Garcia stayed closed. The military base stayed exactly where it was. The people who had won their case still couldn't go home. For 6 more years, everything stood still. Then, behind closed doors, something finally moved. On May 22, 2025, Britain and Mauritius signed a treaty that had taken more than half a century and thousands of exiled lives to arrive at. Britain agreed to give up sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago. The islands would legally belong to Mauritius again, for the first time since 1965. Chagossians would finally be allowed to go home. Mauritius could resettle families across more than 50 islands. Britain agreed to fund a trust for the very community it had spent decades denying even existed. For Olivier Bancoult, who had first walked into a courtroom 25 years earlier, it was the ending he'd spent his life fighting for. Except for one island. Diego Garcia, the largest island, the one most Chagossians actually came from, the one this entire story had always been about. Carved out of the agreement completely. No resettlement. No return. Not for anyone. The base stays exactly where it is, under UK and US control, for at least the next 99 years. Britain now pays Mauritius roughly $136 million a year just to keep operating it. So read that agreement carefully. Here's what it actually says. You can have your country back. Just not the one island that was ever really yours. It's a genuine, hard-won victory. Decades of a paperwork trick, finally, formally undone. And for the families born on Diego Garcia specifically, it's another door closing exactly where the first one did, 54 years ago. This should have been where the story ends. It isn't. Here's the part almost nobody expected. Even after Britain and Mauritius signed the agreement, the story still wasn't over. The reason goes all the way back to 1966. The military base on Diego Garcia wasn't just a British project. It was built under an agreement between Britain and the United States, which meant Washington still had a say. At first, that didn't seem like a problem. The negotiations moved forward quietly. Both governments appeared to be on the same page. Then, in early 2026, everything changed. The President of the United States publicly criticized the agreement. Soon afterward, he posted a direct message to Britain. Do not give away Diego Garcia. His argument wasn't about history, it was about strategy. Diego Garcia remains one of the most valuable military bases in the world. From there, aircraft and ships can reach the Middle East, East Africa, and much of Asia. And suddenly, the agreement stopped moving. Without American approval, Britain cannot complete the transfer. Mauritius says it isn't giving up. Its leaders have promised to keep fighting through diplomacy and international law. But today, right now, the agreement remains frozen. Not cancelled, not completed, simply waiting. Families who believed they were finally going home are once again waiting for another political decision made thousands of miles away. After 55 years, they're still waiting for someone else to decide where they belong. 55 years ago, a group of officials looked at a small chain of islands and decided the people living there were inconvenient. So they rewrote documents, changed legal definitions, moved families, built a military base. One decision changed thousands of lives forever. But here's what never changed. The people who lost their home never stopped calling it home. Even in exile, they kept speaking their language. They kept singing their songs. They kept teaching their children about beaches most of those children have never been allowed to see. Over the decades, governments changed, prime ministers changed, presidents changed, courts issued new rulings, treaties were signed, others stalled. But one thing stayed remarkably constant. The Chagossians never stopped asking for the same thing: to go home. Today, the future of Diego Garcia is still uncertain. The agreement remains unfinished, the legal arguments continue, and thousands of Chagossians are still waiting. Some have spent their entire lives in exile. Others have died without ever seeing home again. Which leaves one final question. If the world's highest court can recognize an injustice, if governments can admit mistakes, if history itself can be rewritten, why is going home still impossible? History is filled with places that disappeared from maps, and with people who almost disappeared from memory. Here, we tell those stories. If you enjoy documentaries that uncover forgotten history, consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next one.